Welcome to State of Ed, a podcast about education inside the classroom and out. My name is Marc. Nick Simone is busy working on his dissertation, so I'm flying solo here at AMLE 22, an annual conference of middle school educators hosted in the sprawling Gaylord Palms Resort in Orlando, Florida. One of the things I love about coming to big conferences like this is that it reinforces my belief that there are so many talented educators out there doing wonderful, innovative work. My guest today is a perfect example. I'm happy to welcome onto the podcast Cathleen Beachboard. Cathleen is a teacher, writer, researcher, speaker, and mental health advocate. Her work has been featured on TEDx, EdWeek, and Edutopia. She's also the author of The School of Hope. Welcome, Cathleen, to State of Ed podcast.
Thank you, Marc. It's so nice to be here with you.
What drew you to begin doing research on hope?
Well, what drew me to start all my research was a random Google search. So when I adopted my 5 children who came from a case of extreme abuse and neglect, I thought I was prepared. I thought teachers are trauma informed. They know what to do. But the reality was I didn't know what to do. So as soon as I got my kids, they came home and they started hugging and crying the first day. And I couldn't build a relationship with that. And I knew relationships help trauma, but I didn't know what to do. And so I started breaking down. I Google searched how to fix broken children. And from that Google search, that's when I discovered what hope was. And hope is one of the most powerful forces in the universe, but our society makes hope into a mix of wishful thinking and luck. But that's not what hope is. Psychological hope is one of the most powerful forces. And so I realized when I was looking at these research studies that hope had the power to help my children out of their trauma and to help them thrive. So I started measuring and raising their hope like you would with any sort of test. And I'm going to tell you, my kids today, they're successful. 2 of them are here with me at Universal Studios doing amazing things. And they have high enough grades where they can miss school and still be fine. But it didn't start off like that. And so this is not a short-term fix for education. What I'm presenting is a long-term fix. It's the long game of education. If we go and we build hope, we're building students who will be resilient and successful in life despite the obstacles they face.
You had mentioned in your presentation that there's, I guess we can call it a scientific definition of hope. So how do you and researchers define hope?
So hope is a mix of 3 things. It's a mix of your goals. That's your, overall things that you set for your life. It's a mix of your agency, which is your willpower or motivation to reach your goals, and pathways. That's your ability to form a path to your goals and problem solve along the way. So those 3 things combine together to form psychological hope, which is measurable, as you probably saw in my session just a few minutes ago, using the adult hope scale for the adults in the building and the children's hope scale for children. And those are both free online.
How do you measure hope? What are some of the ways to do that?
So for example, if a school wants to look at the hope of their students, that's probably the first course of action. By measuring the hope of your students, you're finding out the kids who really, they believe in themselves, they have goals, and then you're finding out the students who don't. And the thing is, those kids who don't, if they have no goals and they have no hope, those are going to be your students who check out, who are more reactionary. And the reason why is essentially through the pandemic, we all went through trauma. Every single person did. And they came back to school and teachers are more stressed than ever because they're dealing with more trauma and more secondary trauma. And so by measuring hope, you can find out the kids who have a deficit area. And like any test, let's say they're low in pathways, you can strengthen that by giving them tools to strengthen their pathways. And so that's why I feel like this is a profound thing, because I did it with my own children. Like my oldest son, for example, he was low on agency or willpower. He would try to willpower his way through the day, and then something would happen and he'd be reactionary. But willpower over the course of the day, if you're using it over and over, leads to burnout. And so he set up, I talk about in my book about setting up hopeful habits. And I also talk about looking at pre-commitment devices so you don't use your willpower. And so he learned those things. And throughout his day, he went from being more reactionary in school to being able to get through the day. And so we have to get to the underlying hope issue, because hope is the first emotion we ever learn, but it impacts us for the rest of our lives. So raising hope is one of the most profound things we can do for kids. So if we measure it, that's where we can see where our kids are at so we can help them get better.
Can you give us an example of one of those tools that you had mentioned where we can kind of zero in on a particular deficit and try to help someone advance their or raise their hope level?
Yeah, let's say a staff member or a student is low in pathways thinking. What they need to practice ultimately is being able to problem solve and also divergent thinking. In schools, we teach a lot of convergent thinking. 1 + 1 is 2. The problem with that is our students form one path to their goals. And then when something happens, it's a catastrophe because their path didn't work. And then those kids, if my path didn't work, I start to feel hopeless. So, for example, I had a student named Zoe, and she had low pathways, and this was many years ago, and I write about her in my book with her permission. And she essentially came into my class the first day of school, and when she came in, all I did was ask her about her family. That was it. I just said, "Hey, write about your family." And she threw a desk across the room, cracked the window. The kids started crying. And the teacher across the hall was on planning. And she came in and she's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm okay." And then I hear her crying in the bathroom down the hallway. So the other teacher comes in and she watches the class. And I go down the hallway and I see her sobbing on the floor. And she's crying, and I'm like, whoa. So one of the things that she was lacking was she had low pathways. When she felt big emotions, she didn't have any coping skills or self-regulation tools because she was used to just being reactionary. So at that moment, I was like, hey, we're going to use the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique. And that utilizes your 5 senses. So this is a pathways practice for kids who are low in self-regulation and have no tools. So she's there crying, going, "Ah!" And I'm like, "Okay, Zoe, what are 5 things you can see?" And she's on the floor of the bathroom.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and she goes, "I see a toilet, and it's kind of gross." And then from there, she's like, "Well, I guess I see the tiles. They're black and white." And then it uses your 5 senses. So it was 5 things she could see. Then we moved down to 4 things she could touch, 3 things. And after that, 3 things she could hear. And in order to do the hearing one, guess what you have to do?
You have to stop crying,
That's
stop yelling,
right.
stop everything.
And it distracts the brain from the overwhelming amygdala response she was in. It grounds her to the moment. So I grounded her to the moment. And after only 3, I didn't even have to go through 2, which is what you can smell, and 1, which is something you can taste. So she stopped.
Which in the bathroom you really
Yeah,
get some
no, you don't want to taste the toilet. Usually they're like toothpaste.
You're inspired to get to be done by 2, yeah.
So she was like, I'm so sorry, Miss Beachboard. I just didn't know what to do because my family is going through a horrible situation because my dad just went to prison. I'm living with my grandma, and we just found out she has terminal cancer.
Ooh.
So did I know any of that on the first day? No, but after realizing that she was lacking a skill, and this is just like hope, that after I took her overall hope score a day later, it became evident she was low in pathways. So I needed to strengthen the tools or resources she would use to solve big emotional problems, to problem solve on her way to a goal, to plan for problems when she's goal setting. Those are simple tools that you can do to strengthen pathways. And over the course of time, the more tools I gave her, guess what? The more successful she was because she was able to use them.
That sounds a lot more effective than snap out of it, or if you continue, I will, give you detention or suspension or whatever it is. And this sounds so much more impactful.
It is, and I think the thing that we forget is every behavior is a form of communication. And what it's communicating is an underlying skill gap or need that the child has. No one, and I really believe every person is good at heart. No one wants to purposely be malicious. And so if a kid has this behavior, like my own child, the teacher, when he went to school after being traumatized by his parents, she raised her voice and he went under the desk and she's like, stop trying to be the class clown, blah, 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 and started raising her voice. She didn't know that for my own kid, what was that communicating? That was a survival skill. And the fact that she was belittling the behavior, that kept him alive. And that's why we cannot judge behaviors. We don't know our students' backstories. And so with him, he had to gain tools to regulate. And it changed him over the course of time. But that's why we have to remember, during those big emotional reactions where we start to feel the contagion of our students feeling those big emotions, we need to take a minute. We need to calm down and say, what is this behavior communicating? Because that communication, getting to the underlying skill, not just saying, oh, you have ISD, you have out of school suspension. If we just do that, we're going to get the same problems over and over again. We have to get to the root of the issue. And HOPE allows us to do that, to goal set for skill deficits that a student might have, and to have them work on it. Then we're not just putting a Band-Aid on a bleeding out problem.
I love that you mentioned that. I'm a school administrator, and listen, we every now and then there are some issues of student misbehavior, and they find their way down to my office. And occasionally, not often, thankfully, I'll get sort of like questioned or given side eye about how I handle a particular thing because the adult who was disrespected, or the classroom was disrespected in some way, shape, or form through the eyes of the adult, and rightfully so, or understandably, they feel like they want something more than, essentially they want vengeance. That's a very strong word, so that's a little unfair, but they want almost like a head on a pike versus what I'm trying to accomplish, which is to correct the misbehavior and help the individual make better choices in the future when faced with similar types of stimuli. Sometimes people seem very dissatisfied by that approach because they feel like they were hurt or harmed, or their classroom was hurt or harmed, and they want to see some sort of retribution. Perfect word. So what you're mentioning, or your strategies, seem like the way you're articulating them is so much more impactful and effective, and really giving educators a set of tools more than just cut it out, or let's get back to work, or we could talk about it later, or anything like that, because we're dealing with, most of us are dealing with young people whose prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, and their executive functioning skills are not that of adults of 25 or older. So the things that we're asking them often to do, they're just not capable of doing due to no fault of their own. And what you mentioned, a lot of teachers wanting that retribution, I think part of the problem with them wanting that is because they're not always they send them down and they expect a punishment, but that doesn't solve the underlying issue that happened. And so in my session, I went over hopeful problem solving. After there's some sort of restorative meeting for the teacher and the student and the teacher, and this is, administrators, you guys can do amazing things. You're amazing and you're getting to the underlying root, but that's why it's important that the teacher and the student gain the ability to problem solve together. It's working side by side collaboratively to come up with the solution to the problem, and letting the student guide the conversation. By having teachers do that and giving them the tools to do that, it makes light work for administrators, and it also helps the teachers see that the punitive consequence isn't the thing that we need to take care of. We need to take care of the communication of the behavior behind the communication of what the student needs. And so by having to sit down as a teacher and do this with my own students, I'm going to tell you that's why I don't have referrals. I don't have those things, because I'm working on the underlying skill gaps.
And any teacher can do it. With collaborative problem solving, you say, here's my problem, here's the problem we're having in the room, now what are your problems? And you're giving the kid empathy, you're giving them time to express the problem they have, and by working together and creating solutions that address your concern and the student's concern, it also helps the teacher feel like there is some sort of punishment for the kid because they're having to guide this conversation. They're having to work with you. And it also restores your relationship.
I like that very much. In terms of how it impacts your brain, how important is it for a person to be positive or optimistic?
So optimism and hope they're similar, but they're different. So it's having a positive outlook. Well, I'm going to tell you, my second son, who I adopted, he does not have a positive outlook, but he's hopeful. How can you be negative and hopeful? So he likes to say, okay, here are all the things that could go wrong. I'm going to plan for every single one. And, well, that's bad. No, it's not. He's super successful. Why? Because he is looking at the negatives, and there are people like this, but he's creating a plan for each one of them.
They're called school administrators.
Yeah.
But that's maybe that's his future path.
But it's not necessarily optimistic because he's looking at the negative side, but he's looking at the negative side proactively because I've strengthened his pathways. So it's not necessarily your outlook, but it's making sure that you realize that any situation tomorrow could be better, and you have the ability to control the trajectory of your life by working on it day in and day out, taking one step on your goals every day, because it creates momentum that energizes you.
I feel like I'd get along very well with your son because anytime someone comes down to my office with an initiative idea or whatever it is, I say to them, okay, I need like a few minutes to try to figure out how this could go completely wrong, and then I want to work to get to yes. Because it's no good deed goes unpunished, which is something that my father taught me a long, long time ago, and it has proven itself true over and over again. So I want to get to yes. I let them know that right away because I don't want them to think that this is just about me finding critique or criticism in the idea. But I figure if we go there first, work through all those possible negative roads, we can get to the one where the good idea becomes, a really, really good idea and helps everybody. You had mentioned that the research states that all successful people have high hope. So how do you explain the connection between success and hope?
So when you look at hope in the brain, what it does is it changes your medial orbital frontal cortex. And so what it does is as you face stress or anxiety over the course of time, the higher your hope, the less amygdala responses you will have in the face of stress and anxiety. So you'll still have stress and anxiety, but you will not be doing fight, flight, freeze, or flop. You're going to sit and systematically think about those things that are going on and be able to respond appropriately. It'll allow you to, keep dreaming, to keep setting goals, and to keep going despite the obstacles you face. And so ultimately, you can go through horrible things, but having high hope allows you to get through those things. And so why do CEOs and powerful people have high hope? Because they've been through a lot, but they realize that if they keep working and you keep going, there's a chance you can change the trajectory of today, tomorrow.
Let's hold on to that thought for a second. So now we're coming out of a trauma, a collective trauma in our schools. So how can the classroom leader, the teacher, and the building leader, the administrator, create those kinds of cultures of hope that you're referring to, especially at this particular point in time when so many people feel hopeless, given everything that we've gone through, all the traumas that we have gone through collectively and individually?
Yeah. So the first thing is, and this will be a shift for some administrators, I warn you. So a lot of administrators feel like their job is the students, and that's really not it. The teacher's job is the students, if this is done systematically correctly, and the administrator's job is the teachers and the staff. So
that reminds me of Simon Sinek's line, right? When you're the manager, you're not responsible for the customer, you're responsible for taking care of the people who take care of the customer.
That's right. And so how that works is the first line of defense for the administrator is to first realize the hope of their people. And you could also do a hope audit, which is that there are many different types of audits, equity audits, but this one, doing a hope audit of your school, I have one that's coming out next month on my website. It's not out yet because I'm working with a few different research labs, but it goes through the different environments and systems you have in place, and you score yourself just like you would on the adult hope scale or the children's hope scale. And then from there, you look at your strengths and your weaknesses set up in the school, from the systems you have in place for new employees to regular day systems to looking at the classroom systems, but looking at each one of those individually, scoring them separately, and then looking at your overall school after you add up your points from each system. And then once you have that data, just like with the adult or the children's hope scale, you can do something about it. If you don't have a hopeful culture, you need to look at your areas of weakness, but not just work by yourselves. A lot of administrators, they put a lot of weight on themselves to solve all the issues in the building. And that's yeah, it's true. But the thing is, you have a strength. What's your strength? Your staff. And coming out and being vulnerable, kind of like what Brene Brown would say, and saying, look, I did an audit and we're weak here. What can we do to fix this? What do you guys are the experts. What do you think we can do? And then coming up with systems collaboratively with your staff will allow them to have buy-in, will allow them to work with you and to create a more hopeful culture together, where you're not just handing down, oh, this is our vision statement, our mission statement, working together. And not just on your leadership teams, as a whole staff, where every person has a voice. That's important. Your staff meetings should be more about solving the problems together proactively than just giving initiatives and professional development. And then from there, the teachers, what they need to do is look at the staff, look at their student culture in the classroom and figure out who those hopeful kids are. And the same thing with the administrators. Once you know a person's hope score, you can utilize that. I said in my own classroom, I find out who the high hope kids and I sprinkle them around. Why? Because research shows if you're around someone over the course of time, you have a similar hope score. So my high hope score, if you put me with someone with low hope, oh, it's going to lower them. No, that's not what the research shows. I'm going to bring them up.
Oh, wow.
And so finding out who your hopeful teachers are and creating mentors and guides for your newer teachers, that's going to change your building over time, especially as those new teachers get acclimated to the culture, because the first thing they're going to experience is hope. You as an administrator have a different power dynamic than another teacher. And so saying, hey, 14-year veteran teacher, I want you to have a mentor. A mentor for me? I'm a 14-year teacher. I understand that, but you need support too. Everybody does. And providing hope mentors for staff who are low in hope, where they can just sit with them and work on, their own social emotional needs, where they talk about their classroom and the things that are agitating them. And it gives them a safe space where I'm not being judged by an administrator. I feel like I can talk to someone because they're on the same level as me. No one's reporting back, almost like instructional coaching, except with emotional intelligence. And so what happens is the person who is high in hope has the capacity, especially because they're educators, to teach the other person what it is they do in those dynamics, or saying, here's a problem, here's what I would do in that situation. I would think of blank and blank. You're giving me models and frames. And all you have to do as an administrator is create a system for those two people to meet.
I love that. And that reminds me of what you had said in your session, which is the strength of your building is the PD that you provide from within. And that really aligns with everything that you had shared with the group during the session that you just finished. What is your Building Hope initiative, and how is that different from SEL?
Okay, so hope is a positive cognitive process, and SEL are lessons that you teach once a person has that foundation. The foundation below SEL is making sure they have this positive cognitive process. Then from there, you can do social emotional lessons to expand their empathy and other things, because that's not what hope is. Hope is that first emotion we ever learn. And then from there, I have to have hope to form good relationships. So if you're like, I want this kid to have one teacher who believes in them, Well, you better make sure they're hopeful first, or they're not going to create that connection because they think it's pointless. So we create the hope first, then we add in the social emotional learning, because I'm not really ready for it if I don't even believe in myself and I don't believe I have a good tomorrow planned. Like, I need this foundational component. So this is not lessons. This is looking at someone as a person, as a whole, and saying, where are you lacking in this foundational cognitive process? And giving them the tools they need to make up for that deficit. And then once they have that and you add in SEL, oh, you're going to have an awesome school culture and climate. But they need this before that. Like I said, this is taking care of the underlying issue that a lot of students are having. For my own kids, they needed this so they could form a relationship with me. And I'm going to tell you, today, my children are super successful. I have one who's out in the military. I have another one who joined the military during high school so he could pay for college proactively. And he's actually graduating early so he can go to boot camp. So the GI Bill will pay for his college. And then he's already admitted to college. And he thought of all of this on his own.
Wow.
And see, even as a parent, your kids need this. And if we do this and we make sure our kids get to high hope, they'll go through things, but it builds in the resilience they need to endure through life. That's what we want for our kids. We want them to be successful on their own. So they need the resilience, and that comes with hope.
How could our listeners use your website to help develop these practices and put them into play in their own lives?
So the first thing is knowing about yourself. Taking your own hope score. You can do that using the paper copies of the adult hope scale if you're an adult, or if you have children. You can even, for younger kids, take the child hope scale and ask them the questions and record their answers. But it's important that we know where our starting point is. A lot of the times we guess, like with SEL, a big skill is leadership. This isn't, like I said, this is a cognitive process. So we can get a score from this. Once you have the score, you can work on it. It's not an abstract concept. It's concrete. And so once you know the score, then you can start working on it. So for any person, if you're like, wow, I'm low in hope in agency, great. Use the tools that are listed under resources, and they're all free. So you just click on the resource on the area where you're having a deficit, and then utilize the tool throughout your day. So when you come to a problem or you are lacking willpower, use those, like the pre-commitment device. If you're lacking willpower and you feel burnout as a teacher, it's important that we pre-commit to things. Like, I'm going to pre-commit, for example, early in the day. One of the things that I do is I pre-commit to joy. How can you pre-commit to joy through hope? Yeah, because hope creates the pathway. So every day I start my day off watching funny videos. Then from there, I have it built in my day to text one of my best teacher friends and just to tell her she's amazing and to tell her about my day. That's built in my day. The people that we love and cherish and the things that make us feel good, we put them off as educators. And so creating hopeful pathways where I am creating my joy. Hope has taught me that. Where I don't let my day take hold of me, I take hold of my day. And so ending my day with 3 grateful phone calls. Yes, things will happen during my day, but because I was proactive and I created that pathway, it gives me more willpower and it makes my days better.
Wow, that is really wonderful. You've inspired me to start to employ some of these ideas also, because as you were saying them, I could project how that would make me feel good, and I could also project how that would make the people that I would be sharing these things with feel good.
When you express gratitude, that shows relatedness to the other person, which builds their willpower, which increases their overall hope. So the more things that you do to appreciate and show care for your staff, but also to teach them, hey, I've noticed there's this teacher who's having all of these issues in their room. Again, remember, any behavior is a form of communication. So something's going on there. And staff, we assume, oh, they're an adult. They don't need anything. Yeah, I work on myself every day. I need a lot of things. And so that's why it's important for administrators to make that mental shift to building time in their day, actually scheduling it to make sure you're taking care of your staff. And I know behaviors will come up for your students, but this should be sacred time. It's just as important as the behavior of those students, and I would argue that. So doing that will make the teachers feel better, and emotional contagion is the thing, as I've told you. So if you have low hope teachers teaching a massive group of students, what's going to happen? And so that's why it's important that you take care and you provide the oxygen mask for the teachers so they can provide it for the students.
That's a fitting metaphor to end our conversation. I do love that. Kathleen, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. Really can't thank you enough for taking some time out and having this conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. It was so wonderful meeting you. And like I said, all the resources, they're free and they're Googleable. So as soon as you click on it, you get a free copy in your Google account. But just work on your hope. We can change the world by making it a more hopeful place.